Hilchos Avodah Zarah Perek Revi'i, Chapter 4 of the Laws of Idol Worship. Today's topic is the Ir Hanidachat, the city which has been totally convinced to serve idol worship. I want to do a quick intro. Take a look at this paper over here. This is the psukim, the basic laws about Ir Hanidachat. And every word that's highlighted over here, you can see, is expounded. So the Torah says, Yatz'u anashim b'nei v'liyal. You have men that went out who didn't have a yoke. They didn't care about Hashem. Mikir becha, from amongst you. They have to come from your city, your shevet, your tribe. Vayadichu et yoshvei iram lemor. And they convinced the people of their city, again, their city, saying, Nilcha v'navda. Notice the plural form. Let's go serve other gods that you don't know. Then if everything turns out, they do a proper interrogation. Hakeh takeh et yoshvei ha'ir hahi lefi charev. Special law. You kill the entire city by the sword. Hacharei motav et kol asher ba, it, everything in it, the animals, by the sword. And then bet kol shlala tikbot toch chova, all the possessions also you take and you burn. So it's a very unique law. The Talmud even debates if it ever happened. Some people say it never happened. Some people say it did happen. And just as a small point of introduction, there's a big question here. For serving idols, you get stoned. Skila. If you're caught serving idols and warned, b'mezid, you get stoned. Here, the whole city gets killed by the sword. In Torah, sword is lighter than stoning. Now we have a rule that when you're obligated on 2 counts, if you're charged with 2 averot that get you murder, that get you to be killed, you're always killed with the more stringent one. So if every individual served idols, plus he's part of a city who served idols, it should all get stoned, not killed by the sword. So there's a very, very important yesod, a very important principle when it comes to the Ir Hanidachat, which is that they lose their status as individuals. Paka Shem Yechidim, that's called. Their status as an individual goes away. They become a new entity, a tzibur, a new collective entity of idol worshippers. So they're no longer individuals who served, they're only a tzibur who served. They're only a community that served. And we're going to see this principle, which the Rebbe lays down based on the teachings of the Ragachover Gaon. It explains many, many specific elements in this chapter. So let's go. Halacha Aleph. Madichei ir mi Yisrael harei elu niskalin. The people who convince an entire city of Israel to serve idols, they get stoned. Afal pi shelo avdu avodat kochavim. Even though they didn't serve any idols, they just convinced everybody. Ela hidichu et yoshvei iram ad she'avdu ota. Rather, they persuaded the people of their city till they served it. So they are actually getting stoned on a different count, not on the count of idol worship, on the count of persuasion. The people of the city who got persuaded, they get killed by the sword. Only if they served idols, or they accepted them upon themselves as a god. Where do we know the warning against the persuader? The Torah only says that if you persuade, you get punished. Where does it actually say you shouldn't persuade anybody? Where's the warning for this? Shenemar, as it says, Lo yishama al picha. The name of idols should not be heard through or by your mouth. So by persuading somebody, you're going to be forced to mention the idol's name. That's a no-no. Halacha bet. Ein ha'ir na'aset ir hanidachat. A city cannot become a persuaded city. Ad sheyiyu madicha mitocha o me'oto hashevet. The people who persuaded have to be from that city and from their tribe. Shene'emar mikir becha. They come from amongst you, that's your shevet, your tribe. Vayadichu et yoshvei iram. And they persuaded the people of their city. That's the conditions clearly in the Torah. They also have to be 2 or more than 2. They can't be one individual. Shene'emar yatz'u anashim. It's all in the plural. Men went out. B'nei b'liyal. People without a yoke. Vayadichu et yoshvei iram. It's all in the plural. They persuaded their city. They also have to convince most of the city. V'yiyu hamudachin. And the number of persuaded people have to be mime'ah v'ad rubo shel shevet. Minimum 100 people, maximum the majority of the entire tribe. Aval im hudach rubo shel shevet. If the majority of the tribe was convinced, funnily enough, they don't get looked at as the collective entity. Danim otam ki yichidim. We look at them as individuals. Same thing if they're less than 100. We judge them as individuals. Shene'emar, as it says, yoshvei ha'ir. They have to be dwellers of the city, which means an average city. Lo kfar katan v'lo krach gadol. Not a small village, not a big city. Kol pachot mimeya. If you're less than 100 people, kfar katan, you're called a small village. V'rubo shel shevet, if you're the majority of the tribe, krach gadol, you're a big city. So we cannot anymore judge you on the law of the ir hanidachat, a regular city. Also, if women or minors were the ones who persuaded everybody. Imagine that, 2 8-year-old kids come and convince everybody to serve idols. Or it was an individual that did it. Or only the minority of the city was persuaded. Or they were persuaded on their own. They read some books. Nobody came and inspired them. Or the persuaders were from the outside. You don't judge them with the law, the special law of this persuaded city. They're like individuals who served idols. And we only stone, we don't behead everybody who transgressed. And their property, their possession goes to their inheritors. Unlike the Ir Nidachat, all gets burnt. These people are individuals who served idols. Their money goes to their inheritors. Like anybody else who was killed by the court. Halacha Gimel.
What is
Bnei Belial, Bli Ol. They have no yoke of heaven. Kabbalat Ol taking the yoke of heaven is Bli Ol. Bli, Bidiyuk. Halacha Gimel. Ein danin ir hanidachat ela bebeidin shel echad v'shivim. We only judge the persuaded city in the highest court of 71 judges. Shene'emar, as it says, v'hotzeta et ha'ish hahu, o et ha'isha ahi, asher asu et hadavar hara hazeh el she'arecha. When it's one man or one woman that did a bad thing, you take them to your gates, which means yichidim neheragim bebeidin shel kol sha'ar v'sha'ar. Only individuals are killed in the court of every gate of every community. But when the majority is being killed, a lot of people are being killed together, you only kill them or judge them first in the high court. Halacha Daled, some more limiting rules. Any one of the cities of refuge, there were a couple of cities that were used for people to escape if you killed by mistake. They cannot become a persuaded city. Shene'emar be'achat arecha. It says it has to be in one of your cities, and these are not your cities. They're special cities designated for a different purpose. There's a special law that Yerushalayim also cannot become a persuaded city. It wasn't divided amongst the tribes. No tribe can lay claim to this specific city. And the Torah says it has to be one of your cities. So if it's not owned by any specific shevet, it's not your city.
So who dwelled in Jerusalem?
Who dwelled in Jerusalem? Oh, who dwelt there? People lived there. But it wasn't part of the territory.
Designated.
Exactly, it wasn't part of the territory of any tribe. Interesting. Security comes first. You can't make a persuaded city on the border of Israel. So that, because what happens to the city is that it gets totally destroyed. So it's going to be empty land, desolate, and it leaves room for Goyim to come in and destroy Israel. One court cannot declare 3 cities, one next to another, as persuaded cities, because then they all get destroyed. It's too much destroyed land. If they were further from each other, that's fine. As many as it takes, but they can't be too close, so you don't create this massive ruin area. Halacha hey, ein osin. You cannot make a persuaded city. We saw that before in the actual verse. Till the persuaders use inclusive form, not just plural. They include themselves. V'yomru lahem, they tell them, nelech v'na'avod. Let's go and serve the idol in the way that it's usually served. O nelech u'nezabeach, let's go and slaughter animals to it, because slaughtering is one of the 4 things that even if it's not the way it's served, it's called idol worship. O nelech v'naktir, let's go offer something to it. O nelech u'nenasech, let's go and pour libations to it. O nelech v'nishtachaveh, let's go and bow to it. O nelech u'nekabel be'elokah, let's go accept it as our God. V'heim shom'im, and the people listened. Ve'avdu ota derech avodata, they served it the way that it's normally served. O be'achat me'arba avodot, or one of the 4 ways of service that are generic to every idol. O shekiblu be'elokah, or they indeed accepted upon themselves as a God. These are tons of conditions that you have to meet before it becomes this ir nidachat. Ir nidachat shelo nitkaimu ba uvemadicheha kol hatna'im ha'elu. If there's a persuaded city who did not fulfill, or its people, its persuaders did not fulfill these conditions, he'achosim lehem, what do? In the end of the day, they served idols. Matrin u'mi'idin b'chol echad ve'echad mehen she'avad avodat kochavim. You warn and you testify against every individual who served idols. V'soklin otam ki yichidim she'avdu, and we stone them like any individual who served idols. U'mamonam ligar shehem, and their money, their property goes to their inheritors, the people who, their heirs, their relatives. Well, let's say you met all the conditions. Halacha vav v'heach din ir nidachat bizman shetiyeh re'uya lehe'asot ir nidachat. What's the law of the city of persuasion when it's actually fitting. It met all the requirements to become a persuaded city. So here goes. Beit Din, the first thing is, Beit Din HaGadol Sholchin V'Dorshin V'Chokrin. The High Court has to send messengers to inquire, to investigate. Ad sheyedu b'ra'aya berura shehudcha kol ha'ir oruba. Until they know with clear proof that the entire, or at least the majority of the city was persuaded, v'chazru la'avodat kochavim, and have embraced the way of serving idols. Achar kach, once they know for sure, sholchim lahem shnei talmidei chachamim, you send them 2 wise men, lahazhiram u'lahachaziram, to warn them and to try to return them to teshuva. Im chazru v'asut teshuva mutav. The Rambam says something very controversial. If at this point the Jews do teshuva in the city, it's good. The Ravid over here asks, Lo matzati teshuva mo'elet achar hatra'ah u'ma'aseh. How could teshuva help after they've already been warned? They've already done the deed, right? Bet Din has already proved that they're serving idols. How does teshuva help? But the Rebbe explains based on the above principle. Tshuva doesn't help to take away the punishment. Tshuva helps to reduce them from the collective entity who serves idols to individuals. Right. And therefore they can no longer be judged as an irnidacha. They may be judged as individuals if Bet Din sees fit. But the collective entity, that we can no longer impose upon you. V'im yamdu bi'ivaltan, if they stand firm in their foolishness, they say, no, we converted, we're out of the Jewish religion, we love idols. Beit Din mitzavin l'chol Yisrael la'alot aleihem latzava. Then the High Court gives out the ruling, everybody has to go up to the city to wage war, if need be. V'hein sarin aleihen, we siege the city, v'orchin imahen milchama ad shetibaka ha'ir. And we make a war until the city caves, till if there's walls, till the walls come down, till we get in. Kishatibaka. As soon as we get in, as soon as the walls break, miyad marbin lahem batei dinim v'danim otam. We bring in many small courts, and we put each man to judgment. Kol mi shaba'u alav shnei edim, she'avad kochavim achar shehitru oto. Anybody who has 2 witnesses against him that he served the idols after being warned, mafrishin oto, we separate him to the side. Nimtzu'u kol ha'ovdim miyuta. If after this count all the servers are only the minority of the city, soklin otam, we stone them, ush'ar ha'ir nitzol, and the rest of the city is saved. But if indeed it turns out that they're the majority, we bring them to the High Court in Jerusalem, Bet HaMikdash, and we conclude their case there. And everybody who served gets killed by beheading by the sword. And everybody gets killed. Taf v'nashim, even children and women. Assuming everybody was convinced. If it's only a majority, you don't kill everybody. But you do kill the women and children of the ones who served by the sword. Why? That's not fair. Some of the commentaries say, it's to like an extra punishment to the adults who did serve. Why? Where do you find that someone else should lose their life because you did a sin? People don't die for each other. But it's with this principle that we said before. Because they've turned into a tzibur of the Avodah Zarah, and women and children are part of that tzibur, they have to suffer the same consequence, not punishment, just result. Hakeh takeh, you hit everybody, they're part of the city, they get killed. Regardless of whether the majority of the city or the entire city was persuaded, the ones who did the persuasion, they get stoned on account of their sin of being persuaders. We then take all of the possessions belonging to the city to the main town square. Ein la rechov or sin la rechov. If there's no town square, you make a town square. So you imagine they could be there for a couple of weeks. They make a square, just to destroy it. If the main square was outside of the city borders, bonin choma chutz mimenu ad sheikanes letocha. We build a wall around it, so now it's part of the city. Shene'emar el toch rechova. You have to bring it into the town square, so it has to be inside the city. We also kill every living animal inside it. We burn down all the possessions with the actual city in fire. This is a positive commandment to burn it. You burn in fire the city and all its possessions. What about the properties of the righteous people in the city? The rest of the city dwellers who weren't convinced with the majority. Nisrafin bichlal shlala. Their property still gets burnt amongst the property. Ho'il v'yashvu sham mamonan avad. Since they dwelt there, they chose that bad choice to dwell there, their money does get destroyed along with everybody else. And it's also tied to the same principle of becoming part of the tzibur. By dwelling in the city, their property becomes part of the property of the city. They may be saved because they didn't serve idols, but not their money. If you would derive pleasure or benefit, even the tiniest bit, from this city, lokeh achat, you get 1 set of lashes. Shene'emar, v'lo yidbak bi'adcha me'uma min ha'cherem. It says, nothing shall stick to you from that which has been condemned, from that which was destroyed. The Rambam says only one, because we're going to see later in chapter 7 that if you have benefit from any other idols, you get 2 sets of malkut. But for Ir Nidachat, it's only one. Halacha chet, Ir Nidachat shehuz mu'edeha. What happens if a persuaded city has witnesses on it, but the witnesses were found to be false? Eidim zomimim. Which means, not that their testimony was contradicted, but that they were contradicted. In other words, the next set of witnesses says, you were with us on the day that you say you were by the city. So we don't know what happened, but you couldn't have been there. That's called edim zomimim. False, but they're false in themselves, not false in their statement.
Like what they're saying might be true.
Exactly, but you couldn't have seen it. So what happens now is, since by Torah law, the moment they gave their testimony, all of the property was destined to be destroyed, so all the property legally becomes hefker, becomes ownerless. Every person in his own mind, thinking that the witnesses were true, had already given up possession of his property.
Right.
So the Torah says now, if later on it was discovered that the witnesses are false, kol ha'machazik b'nechaseha zacha. Anybody who now goes and shows ownership over the property gets to keep it. Umutar lehanot bo and can have benefit from it. Sharei huzmu, because the witnesses were falsified. V'lama zachaba. But why should a random individual get the property? Shekol echad ve'echad kvar hifkir mamono misha'ah shenigmar dino. Every individual already renounced his ownership to his property the moment his law was sealed. So now he's like everybody else. So if he comes back first to claim his property, good for him. If not, and someone else grabs it first, it's up for grabs, free for all. Whoever takes it first wins. Another law of the Ir Nidachat is ve'einan yivnet le'olam. It can never be rebuilt, ever. If you rebuild the city, you get lashes. Shene'emar, as it says, lo tibaneh od, it shall never be rebuilt. Umutar la'asota ganotu pardesim. But you could make it into gardens and orchards. Shene'emar, lo tibaneh od. It cannot be rebuilt. Lo tibaneh medina kemo shehaita. It can't be rebuilt as a city with houses the way it was, but orchards and gardens, agriculture is fine. What happens if you had a caravan of people traveling from city to city, and they ended up in this city, and they passed through this persuaded city, and they joined the bandwagon. They were persuaded with it. Do they get killed? If they had been living there for 30 days, they're treated as part of the city. They get killed by the sword. Their property is destroyed. If they hadn't lived there for 30 days, they don't become part of Yoshvei Ha'ir. In the verse it says Yoshvei Ha'ir, dwellers of the city. They're not dwellers. They haven't lived there for 30 days. So therefore, hein biskila umamonam liyorshehem. They get stoned as individuals who serve idols, and their property goes to their heirs. Halacha yud nichsei anshe medina acheret shahayu mufkadin betocha. What if you had another city whose property was deposited in this city? Afal pisha kiblu alehen achrayut. Even though the members of this city took full responsibility in case of loss or accident, they would replace it so it becomes kind of part of their property. You would think, ein nisrafin. They don't get burnt. They go back to their owners. Shene'emar shlala v'lo shlal chaverta. You only burn its possessions, not the possessions of its friend, of its nearby city. What about the opposite way around? People in this city had their property deposited in another city. If at the time of the whole tararam of the Ir Nidachat, their stuff was brought back to the city, nisrafin bichlala, they get burnt with it. V'im lav, if they were kept in the other city, in ma'abdim otam, you don't destroy them. They go to their heirs because they weren't in the city at the time. Now the Rambam discusses for the next couple of halachot laws of different possessions that may be subject to other rulings. Halacha yud aleph behema. You have an animal. It's owned jointly. It's owned partially by people in the city and partially by people outside the city. But the animal now was in the city. Harezu asura, it's forbidden. Why? Because an animal can't live in two halves. So its half that's owned by the outside city is dependent on the half that's owned by this city. So therefore, it's considered to be part of this city. On the other hand, if you have a doe that's jointly owned by outside and inside the city, muteret, that's permitted, because you can divide it. You just split it in half, one half to the outer city, and the half belonging to this city actually gets burnt. Halacha yud bet. You have an animal, it's in the city, supposed to be killed. You run ahead and you shecht it, you slaughter it. Have a little barbecue. Asura bahana'a, it's forbidden to derive benefit from it. Like a stoned ox, which gets slaughtered. We have a law later on in the 10th book. If an animal kills a person, it has to be killed. It's called a shor haniskal. If you go before it gets stoned and you slaughter it, you can't derive benefit. Same thing over here. Because it's destined to die, you can't slaughter it. Sa'ar harosh, what about hair on people's heads? Ben shal anashim, ben shal nashim shaba. Whether men or women in the city, mutar b'hana'ah. Surprisingly, you can shave it off their heads and derive benefit from it. Aval shal pe'an nochrit, but if there was already a wig in the city, it was already cut off from the humans before they were killed, harehu miklal shlala ve'asur. It's part of the possessions, because it's not part of the people. And it's forbidden. Huh? Why is there an exception to the hair? We'll see in this halakha right now. Halakha yud gimel, perot hamechubarin shebetocha. What if you have fruits that are on the tree, still attached to the tree in the city? Mutarin. They're allowed to be eaten. Shene'emar, as it says, tikbotz v'sarafta. You have to gather all the possessions and burn it, which means you only burn those possessions that need only 2 steps. Misha eino mechusar ela kibutz usreifa. Only those who are lacking gathering and burning. Yatzu pirot hamechubarin, that excludes attached fruit. Shehem mechusarin tlisha v'kibutz usreifa. They need 3 steps. They have to be detached, then gathered, then burnt. So they're attached. You can keep them. Hu hadin lis ar harosh. Same thing with the human hair. Since it's attached, it can't just be gathered in and burnt. It has to be first detached, then gathered, then burnt. Therefore, it's permitted. Needless to say, the trees themselves are permitted. They belong to the heirs. What about property that was already declared holy? It was meant to go to the Bet HaMikdash. What do you do with it now? If they were designated for the Mizbeach, to be actual sacrifices, they get killed, these animals. The verse says the sacrifice of a wicked person is considered an abomination. It's disgusting, so we don't bring it. But anything which was made holy for the temple coffers, it was going to go into the temple's bank, not to be on the Mizbeach, yipadu. They should be transferred to other money. Then you actually burn the objects. You only have to burn its property, not heaven's property. You should transfer the holiness to other money, but only then burn it. What if you had animals that were firstborn, or maaser behema? Every year you have to give 1/10 of your animals to the temple. And you have these animals designated, you hadn't brought them to Yerushalayim yet, and now they're in the city. What do you do? Tmimim, if they're whole, unblemished, harehen kachem mizbeach, they are considered to be holy sacrifices of the mizbeach. V'yamutu, they have to die, like in the last halakha. Uba'alei mumim, but if they have blemishes, in which case you're allowed to eat them. Harehen bichlal behemta, they're included in the animals of the city. V'neheragin, and they get killed. So on either count, they have to die. Hatrumot shebetocha. What about truma? You had produce that was set aside for a kohen inside the city. Im higiu liyad kohen. If they had already reached the hand of the kohen, yirakvu, let them rot. Mipnei shehem nechasav, because they're his property and they're considered therefore property of the city. V'im adayin hin biyad Yisrael. But if they're still in the hands of the Jew who wants to give it to the kohen, yinatnu lekohen shel medina acheret. Pass them on to the kohen in a different city. Mipnei shehem nichsei shamayim or kedushatan kedushat haguf, because they belong to heaven and they're holy in their body. Not only in their value, their actual body of the produce is holy. You give it to a different kohen. Halakha tetvav, maaser sheni, the kesef maaser sheni, the kitvei hakodesh shebetocha, the produce of the second tithe. You give truma to the kohen, 1/10 to the Levi, a second 10th you take for yourself, and it's holy. You bring it to Jerusalem. You're supposed to, or when you transfer it to money. So you have maaser sheni itself, or money of maaser sheni, or holy writings in the city. Hareilu yiganezu. All of these should be buried. And now halakha tetzayin, the Rambam addresses the seeming cruelty of this ruling. Kol ha'oseh din. Anybody who does the judgment properly on this persuaded city, you actually are merited to be considered as though you brought a burnt offering on the Mizbeach. Burning the city is like burning a sacrifice. Shene'amar kalil la'Hashem elokecha. By the city, it says it's totally burnt to Hashem, and by the burnt offering, it says the same thing. Then not only that, through this, you remove Hashem's anger from the Jewish people. You do this so that God will return, calm down from his anger, and you're bringing upon them, those people who are killed, you're bringing upon them blessing and mercy. He gives you mercy, he has mercy upon you, and he will make you flourish and multiply.